The Gospel of Matthew tells us from noon until 3 in the afternoon, darkness came over all the land. It truly was a dark day. Darkness in the Jewish tradition meant divine judgment. It has also signified chaos in creation, exile, oppression, tyranny, injustice. However, darkness comes in many forms. It has come in the form of wars, pandemics, natural disasters, genocide, and famine, just to name a few. Many of us have experienced our own darkness in our own lives in the form of loss of a loved one, a miscarriage, a job, a relationship. For others, it's come in the form of anxiety and depression and fear. It has come in the form of broken relationships, friendships, past wounds from family, teachers, coaches, and friends. We've all experienced darkness. The disciples were no different as they watched their friend, their teacher, their rabbi be brutally arrested and flogged and humiliated. The darkness that day probably felt like it would never end as they watched Jesus slowly die on a cross with his hands nailed. And it didn't end for them there. We find the disciples hiding with doors locked for fear that the religious leaders would come after them next. I'm sure they felt disappointment, bewilderment, fear, and had a lot of questions, of course. I can only speculate and imagine the thoughts and questions circulating their mind as they were hiding. And I wonder if they asked themselves, who were we actually following the last 3 years? Was he really the one? He couldn't have been. It seems like it all ended today. He performed miracles, didn't he? I mean, he walked on water, no? He had to be the one. But he's been crucified. Jesus experienced the darkness that day that changed everything forever. But were there any glimmers of light that day or that week? I mean, surely Jesus riding in on a donkey, being hailed as those shouted, "Hosanna! Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessed is the King of Israel." I mean, surely that had to be a glimmer. It would seem that they saw him as Messiah and King. However, what seemed to be a moment of praise and acknowledgement of Jesus as King was really coming from a group of people that expected and wanted a different Messiah altogether. One that would overthrow Rome and rule and reign with force. He wasn't what they expected or what they wanted in a Messiah, for he'd go to the cross unjustly, not putting up a single fight. It wasn't the Messiah they wanted. But I mean, surely the Last Supper had to be a glimmer of light. After all, Jesus is with his closest friends, his disciples, sharing an intimate meal together. A meal that represented the very exodus and liberation from Israel, from Pharaoh's grip on them. Yet within the meal, it was evident that Jesus already knew what was in store for him and where he would need to go. He would become the Passover lamb. Everything that day, that week, was building to its climax on the cross, the very place where the earth would change forever. The darkness that came that day would be inevitable. What Jesus did that day, we could not do for ourselves. What Jesus did that day was the culmination of everything that had come before it. From Abraham's faithfulness, leaving everything he knew to be a blessing to all nations, to the miracle birth of Isaac, to Jacob, to Moses leading his people out, to Ruth, to Boaz, to Naomi, to Tamar, to David, to Solomon. Everything was pointing toward Jesus and the cross. And so he went willingly on our behalf to Golgotha, the place of the skull. But what did the darkness and the cross represent? One scholar says it so eloquently, and that he could not establish the new creation without allowing the poison in the old to have its full effect. He could not launch God's kingdom of justice, truth, and peace unless injustice, lies, and violence had done their worst, and like a hurricane had blown themselves out, exhausting their force on this one spot, the cross. He could not begin the work of healing in the world unless he provided the antidote to the infection that would otherwise destroy the project from within. This is how the early work of Jesus' public career and healings and celebrations and forgiveness changed hearts. It all looked forward to this moment. This is what it looks like when Israel's God becomes king. This is what it looks like when Jesus is enthroned as the King of the Jews. This is the necessary prelude to the new day in which the kingdom of God will come with power. Knowing all this, Jesus went, knowing God made him who had no sin be sin for us, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. And I wonder within the pain of the flogging, all the pain from the nails, that quite possibly the hardest moment may have come when he cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me? Why have you abandoned me?" I wonder if in that moment, Jesus truly felt the darkest and the deepest pain as the communion and the intimacy with the Father that he's always known was inextricably broken. We have a Messiah that knows the darkness. He knows our darkness. He knows the world's darkness, for he took it upon himself. You see, the darkness was hope not yet realized. The darkness was a new kingdom coming, a new covenant. You see, the cross in all its darkness was actually the moment in which the new Exodus was arriving, where new life for us, all of us, was actually made possible. So Jesus cries out, and it goes on to say, when some of those standing there heard this, they said, "He's calling to Elijah." Immediately, one of them ran and got a sponge. He filled it with wine vinegar, put it on a staff, and offered it to Jesus to drink. The rest said, "Now leave him alone. See if Elijah comes to save him." And when Jesus had cried out again in a loud voice, he gave up his spirit. At that moment, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. The earth shook, the rocks split, and the tombs broke open. The bodies of many people who had died were raised to life. They came out of the tombs after Jesus' resurrection and went into the holy city and appeared to many people. When the centurion and those with him who were guarding Jesus saw the earthquake and all that happened, they were terrified and exclaimed, "Surely he was the Son of God." Surely he was the Son of God. It is at the cross where people have found new hope. It is at the cross where people have found new life. It is at the cross where the greatest act of divine love was shown. What the disciples and others couldn't see yet was a profound hope that the cross would represent. For within days, the light would shine through, and the dawn of the third day would arrive.